Welcome to Claim Your Confidence, a podcast that will introduce you to the most powerful people in the world. No matter what obstacles you face, Claim Your Confidence will inspire and motivate you to go after the life you want. Are you ready to claim your confidence?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Claim Your Confidence. I'm Lydia Fenet, coming to you from Rockefeller Center, sitting here in Newsstand Studios on what appears to be a spring day. We're hopeful in New York it's coming soon. We're waiting with bated breath. But truthfully, I don't even need a spring day because I have a complete and total ray of sunshine sitting in front of me. Sarah Wetenhall is not only a friend of mine, but she's also the owner and CEO of the Instagram-worthy, obsession-worthy Colony Hotel in Palm Beach. And I love the story of how she got there, and I cannot wait to share this. But first and foremost, let me say, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you, Lydia. It is so great to be here with you today. It is sunny and beautiful outside. As you said, it is sunny and beautiful in these studios, and we're going to have a blast.
We are going to have a blast. That is the truth. So buckle up, guys, because this is going to be a fun conversation. So I've known Sarah for many years. A lot of times in New York, people will ask you how you know people, and I'll just say, I know them from New York, meaning that you bump into them so many times you feel like you know them, and you can't even really trace back to where you first met them. So that's how I feel like I've known you for many years.
It's true, and there's many interconnectivities. I think we were introduced to each other by different people at different stages of our lives multiple times.
It's so true.
It's funny. It's so New York.
It is so New York. But I will say it's been really fun for me to watch as a friend in this past recent iteration of your life, which is taking over the Colony Hotel. And we're going to get to that. But I want to start off at the beginning of Sarah's life, because Sarah just sits here with like this tousled blonde mane of hair, looking so poised and perfect. Sarah, was this always who you were when you were growing up in Kansas City?
So interesting. I'm an only child, so I have to lay the groundwork there.
I feel like you always say that too.
I'm an only child, and so I'm very textbook only child. So no, I wasn't always the person that I am today. I think that there were roots and shoots inside me that now that I am where I am and who I am, I can look back, and there were signposts along the way. But no, I was very quiet as a child, again, only child. So I grew up around adults, able to talk to adults, but I was alone a lot and very comfortable with my own company. I read. Yeah. I daydreamed in my head. I kept myself my own best company.
I love that. And when you were little, reading and daydreaming, was there ever a part of you that thought, one day I'll own a hotel?
So definitely not. And that's a question that I get often. You know, we moved around a lot when I was growing up. I'm from, like you said, Kansas City, Missouri, the Midwest. But we moved every 4 years, my family, for my dad's job. It was the 80s, and he was in technology. And so we ended up finding our way to Seattle, like many tech families did in those days. But because I led this quasi-nomadic lifestyle and had to invent and reinvent myself so many times, I didn't necessarily dream of owning a hotel, but I dreamed of a bigger life, and I dreamed of travel, and I dreamt most definitely about kind of the eye-opening that comes when you discover a new place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I began to be almost addicted to the thrill and the desire of discovery because I had to like it. It was how I was raised.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. And I feel like as someone who also loves travel so much, there's nothing I love more than that uncomfortable feeling when you're dropped in a place that you don't know anything about. And then 4 or 5 days later, you look around in the same spot and you realize that you have all of these new markers and it feels like a second home in many ways.
Yeah.
It's such a cool part of traveling. And I love the idea of discovery being such a huge part of your early life because certainly even living in New York, I feel like there's constant discovery going on, just navigating around the city.
It's so true. And the person that you become in those new spaces, I think you discover aspects of yourself, strengths and weaknesses, inclinations, things you're dissuaded from. And that only comes when you press those boundaries and you put yourself in a new environment.
So you were living in Seattle for much of your childhood or just sort of
just high school, 4 years.
Just high school. Oh,
exactly.
Goodness.
So my roots are in Missouri. That's where my extended family is. But we lived in Ohio, Missouri, Tennessee, and then finally Seattle.
And did you enjoy living in Seattle?
Yes and no. I was there at a really tricky time. So I was in Seattle in the late 80s, very early 90s. And I made the move to Seattle from Nashville, Tennessee. So, if you think about what was happening in the Seattle grunge scene in the early 90s, and imagine taking a blonde only child
From Tennessee.
From Tennessee that thought like the end all be all was being like on the cheerleading team and deposit her in gloomy, rainy Seattle in Kurt Cobain's heyday.
Oh my goodness. You're like, I don't have any flannel, so I guess I'll go buy some for high school.
Indeed. I learned how to wear both flannel and Birkenstocks. That was where I was. And now Birkenstocks are so cool. But, it was a tricky transition for me. It was a mid-year move. I moved halfway through my 8th grade year.
Oh, wow.
To complete 8th grade and then high school in Seattle. So it was tricky. And I think I grew to appreciate a lot of things about Seattle because it has a lot to recommend. But fundamentally, I also learned a lot about myself, which was that I don't belong in Seattle.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's part of life too, understanding what you aren't as much as knowing who you are. Yep. So that was probably a good process of elimination.
It was. And I think, I definitely learned, the weather in Seattle can be tricky. I learned about myself. I'm very affected by the weather. Yeah. Sun and I are we are essential. Yeah. And, we joked about sunny days earlier, but I definitely am affected by the weather. And so for me, Seattle was a tricky place.
Well, it's helpful that your hotel is in Florida, certainly, if that is something that you enjoy.
That is definitely by design.
By design. But from Seattle, you were done with the West Coast at that point because you went back to Tennessee.
I went back to Tennessee. I mean, and again, I very much romanticized, I think, Tennessee. This is one of those things you look back, decades later. And I think I romanticized my life in the South. I romanticized my time in Tennessee. That's where I felt comfortable. And so when I got accepted to Vanderbilt University, I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going back. And frankly, my parents, I think, were also, again, only child. My mom was not excited about me moving across the country. And she could get her arms around me moving back to Nashville because we had lived there before. Yeah. We had friends there. I think there was an element of parental comfort that like, okay, we can digest this.
Yeah. Was it nice to be back when you got there? I know you said you'd romanticized it, but did it feel a little bit more like a dress that fit?
It did feel more like a dress that fit. That's a great way to put it. But at the same time, I had grown and changed. Yeah. And so it fit. It didn't fit the way that I necessarily thought it would fit. Yeah. But it was the right place for me at the right time.
It makes me laugh because I went to boarding school in Connecticut, but I grew up in Louisiana, and I have this hilarious story that I always tell about my 9th grade year, sort of rolling into boarding school, which the Northeast at that time, and still to some extent, is not as dressy as the South. And so people were dressed in jeans, not for class, but just for sort of after-school activities with flannel. And I rolled in with my caboodle. If anyone was born around the same time, you'll remember it's a fishing tackle box where you put makeup, basically. Yep. And I had that because I was a cheerleader.
Hopefully paint penned with your name on the top.
Of course. And it was peach, of course, multi-layered. And I definitely remember asking about cheerleading tryouts. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? So there was that. And there was also just this fundamental thing where I would look at people and be like, I don't understand why you're wearing a flannel shirt. Like, that's what I've read lumberjacks wear. And I could not wrap my arms around it. But by senior year, you better believe I had some flannel shirts and jeans.
You figured it out.
Figured it all out. It is true. At that age, when you're trying to find yourself, assimilation is a huge part of that. And just looking like everybody else kind of becomes that. But at the core, it never felt like the right dress for me, for sure. I was really happy to go back to, I went to Swanee. So back to Tennessee for me too.
Headed right back. There you go.
I liked getting back into those dresses with floral patterns, which we're both wearing right now. Indeed. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see this. If not, that's what we're both in, like big...
Imagine us both in floral frocks, and there you go.
We are both in florals right now, for sure. So you graduated from Vanderbilt. Did you head straight to New York from Vandy?
I headed so quickly to New York that I didn't even walk in graduation.
I love it. You just had to be here.
I had to be here. For me, it was, again, I'm very practical. So it was either New York or LA. Yeah. LA, you needed to buy a car. Mm-hmm. New York, you didn't. Yeah. So I ended up in New York because the thought of buying a car was basically insurmountable. Yeah. And
overwhelming.
Yep. Totally overwhelming. And so I headed straight to New York and needed to be here as soon as possible and needed to get a job, more importantly.
Yeah. And so what was that job?
So I had flown myself up to New York, which was the only second time I had been in New York. I flew myself over spring break and tried to do some interviews, bought the New York Times, went through the Help Wanted and all the classified ads, because that's what you did. Again, This is the 90s. I didn't even have an email address at that point, and cold called and sent letters. And I had a few interviews, but everyone was looking for help immediately. Mm-hmm. So when I graduated, I drove here without a job, and I knew I wanted to get in the fashion industry, despite having studied elementary and special education in school. I decided I didn't want to teach. I wanted to get into the fashion space. And so I ended up meeting, through the spring break interviews, a headhunter that told me, when you're graduated, call me. I will help you out. And so my first call was to Steve Marin.
Yeah.
Still remember his name. And I called Steve and said, it's Sarah Wetenhall. You probably don't remember me. And he said, I do remember you. Sarah, you're a Calvin girl. You belong at Calvin. That's exactly what he said. So I went into his office.
Did you know what that meant at that point?
I had no clue. I mean, I knew who Calvin Klein was.
Yeah.
I didn't know what a Calvin girl meant necessarily, but I knew that I needed to hightail it over to his office for an interview stat. So I met with him, and then 2 days later, he had me at an interview at Calvin Klein at their offices on 39th Street, and I had a job the next day.
What was your first day at Calvin like?
So I was hired as a receptionist, a very glamorous job.
I love this.
And the promise was...
I love the first jobs. The first jobs are the best jobs.
This is it. And the promise was, you do this receptionist thing right, and you will get to interview and get promoted from within to whatever department you're interested in. Yeah. And so that was the promise. It was a bit of a risk, of course, but I was a receptionist on the women's collection sales floor. And that was it. And I was green to New York. I had no clue. One of my very founding early memories was that all the sales associate girls would walk in and out of the corporate headquarters, and we're talking about going to the Hamptons on the weekends.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I don't know what this mythical place is. I know that I'm at my apartment on 36th Street and First this weekend, and I don't know where these people are going, but it sounds wonderful.
Better than my 9th floor walk-up, for
exactly
sure.
It, with no air conditioning.
With no air conditioning, I know. Who even knew that you could leave New York at any time? I think in your early 20s, you're just sort of here all the time.
You're marooned.
Yeah.
That was the summer I cut my hair. That was the year that the movie Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow came out.
Right.
And so I got myself a Sliding Doors haircut because it was so hot in the walk-up that I couldn't handle my hair anymore.
It was done.
And so it was done.
You know what's so funny about those early jobs, and you kind of alluded to this in what you just said, there's so much osmosis that goes into those jobs if you're willing to listen. And it does strike me sometimes. I've had a couple of conversations with younger women who have just moved to the city who do a lot of work from home. And it breaks my heart because I feel like the conversations that I heard when I was just at Christie's in those early days about the Hamptons, about things that I could never even conceive of with my like $12,000 a year salary that I was making. But just as you said, give you these eyeballs into this bigger life and these unbelievable opportunities that if you work hard enough, perhaps, and some luck comes your way, and those two things intersect at the right time, you actually can experience over your time here. And that's really, to me, always the magic of this city.
It's formative. It really is. And it's osmosis is a great way to say it. I mean, it's the water cooler conversations. You learn, and I think you learn, it's about the world around you, but it's also about how one interacts in an office and, you know, the social goods and the social bads and kind of how politics work. And there's a lot, I think, that is lost on the generation that's working from home right now, that I think back to those early days with me, and I was so green and so young and so open.
Yeah.
And I was just a sponge.
So eager, right?
I was a sponge for anything. I mean, I wanted to work late. I wanted to run errands. I just wanted to learn.
Yeah.
But it was strange in those early days. I mean, everyone wore black head to toe at Calvin. And so,
amazing.
you know, I got here and they were like, okay, by the way, you need an all black wardrobe. And I was like, again, you're paying me like, what was it, $19 an hour? Like, I'm like, I don't know if I can afford an all black wardrobe.
You're like, I will wash this every night.
That's exactly it. And I have to walk to and from work. I can't afford anything else.
Yeah.
So like, I hope the shoes are comfortable.
But they're not, because that's the other thing. I just had a conversation with someone about this the other week. I assume it was the same at Calvin. Flats were not a thing.
No.
Tory Burch really brought flats to the forefront where you felt like you were cool. So there were two things you could do. You could wear tennis shoes, which was not cool. Working Girl had just come out. These were not sneakers. These were like white socks up to your knees and high top shoes. Not good. Or you wore your heels everywhere.
Yep.
I mean, I would walk 40 blocks in my heels.
In a heel.
Yeah.
Totally.
Didn't think anything
and
of it.
And it was a point of pride. The only thing that stopped me, because I did start the Working Girl shoe change, because it was tearing my shoes apart.
Oh, totally.
And I was like, I can't afford to buy a new pair of shoes, and I can't have them resold. So I ended up sneakering, but then I would stop 2 blocks short of the office because I did not want anyone to see me.
Absolutely.
And I would step into a bodega and do the shoe change in the bodega.
Yeah.
And then walk to work, because it was Fashion Avenue.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like
you
it was
did not
every
want to be
designer,
caught.
everything,
No.
and it was like I cannot be caught dead in my sneakers.
I know. And now I feel like we all have such fabulous flats. It's like you could even wear them sometimes if you
so
wanted.
true.
It's amazing. It's such a transformative thing. So you were at Calvin for how long? Like, what? And tell us some more fun stories. I love the war stories of the early fashion days.
There were so many war stories. So I spent a summer in reception before, fortunately, an opportunity opened up in the PR department, which is where I wanted to be. I interviewed and was hired as the assistant in the women's collection PR department. And I spent 2.5 years there working from assistant up to coordinator and then eventually manager, and all within the women's collection area of PR. At that point in time, I was just, again, spongy. I was just learning. I was just enjoying it. I was just, frankly, trying to not fall on my face and trying to look like I knew what I was doing, cobbling it together. But in retrospect, it was those 2.5 years that laid the foundation for who I am today, and the brand that I've built today, and what I do today, again, in so many ways is directly related to the foundational brand work that I did at Calvin Klein. I mean, it was crazy in those days. Calvin was there himself. It was before the brand was sold. It was before any of the other designers were brought in. And he would walk the floor, so you never knew when he was coming. And sometimes you'd hear that he walked the floor at night, and he would, like, the department heads would get messages about what he liked and didn't like, but everything was scripted. And this wasn't at the store on Madison Avenue. This was the 39th Street headquarters that you could only write in black ink. If there were red or blue pens on your desk, you got in trouble. There were special paper clips covered in black plastic that had to be used. I mean, everything was prescribed. The flowers had to be white orchids, sometimes a white lily, a cream calla lily, but generally a white orchid, clear vessel, not a colored vessel, not a white or a black vessel, a clear vessel. Every detail was prescribed, which again, for me, was the foundation of what I do today, that every detail around you, everything from the scent, everything that you see, touch, feel, hear, that all creates your environment. And that's something that Calvin knew and that he thrived on. And, it's interesting because some people reacted to that positively. Some people got it. Some people absorbed it. I was one of those. I was like, this all makes sense. Everything feels right in the world. And then there were others who reacted negatively and didn't get it and felt like it was controlling, or it was obsessive, or it was oppressive. But for the people that got it, we really thrived and we learned so much.
And it's interesting because if you go to the Colony, which you should because it's fabulous, I think I texted you probably 5 minutes after I arrived that was the experience I was having. Every time I turned, there was something that had been thought through or thought of, whether it be the way that the towel was folded, whether it be the pink and the sunblock that was out by the pool. Like all of these little things that because I travel so much and I spend so much time in hotels, I really do notice. And I do love hotels. I just love the ecosystem of hotels. I love the way they work. And I love the way that they're thought through. And so those things are never lost on me. And you certainly see them at the Colony. And I love that there's this through line between that first job and where you are today.
It's so true. And I think, a lot of hotels look at, there's a lot of interactions when you're in a hotel. Lots of opportunities to interact with staff, to interact with the property. And a lot of hotels out there view those interactions as opportunities for failure. Which, yes, that's true. They are opportunities to fail. But for me, I view those opportunities as opportunities to bring through our brand message and to interact from our brand standpoint with you, our guest. And yes, it's a failure or a success, but it's really a messaging opportunity. And that's what I learned at Calvin, is that everything is an opportunity for messaging.
You stayed at Calvin for how long before you moved on to your next role?
2.5 years. And then I moved on to Dolce & Gabbana.
What a wild swing in the opposite direction. You go from black and white to full color and floral.
The ultimate minimalist to the ultimate maximalist. Which, again, not by design. It was the opportunity felt like a fit for me. I wanted to work for a non-American company. The thought of working for an Italian or a French company was romantic to me. Obviously, I wanted to move up in the pecking order. I wanted more responsibility. That was offered to me at Dolce. At that point in time, Dolce was a smaller company. They were somewhat fledgling then. And so I liked the entrepreneurial spirit that one felt at Dolce. Again, if you had asked me in my 20s or 30s if I was an entrepreneur, I would say, well, no, definitely not. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm not a creative.
Well, it wasn't cool to be an entrepreneur until about 10 years ago,
totally,
I think.
Totally. But I also think I didn't long for the risk and the rush that comes from entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, well said.
I just knew I wanted to be in a smaller environment. Not necessarily less prescribed, but smaller. I wanted fewer layers between myself and the designers. Like I said, I longed for Europe. And I think I liked the passion that comes with Dolce & Gabbana. There's lots of emotion, lots of love, lots of everything.
Italian, very Italian.
Exactly.
And you found that there.
I did, without a doubt. And again, it was It was a great training ground, similar to Calvin in learning that brand message. Their offices lived and breathed Italy. I mean, we had a lovely lady who would sit in the lunchroom and make espressos for everyone every day after lunch.
Wow.
In her black and white, very Italian uniform. And that was her job, was to make sure that we made proper Italian espressos. You had cappuccino for breakfast.
Right.
Espresso after lunch, never a cappuccino after lunch.
No milk, no milk in the coffee after lunch.
Nope, not okay. And everything was very proper and very Italian. And it was just, again, it was that pull through of the brand messaging down to the smallest detail at your corporate headquarters.
I love it. So you leave Dolce & Gabbana. What is your next step?
I went to Harrison and Schriftman,
Right.
a PR agency. At that point in time, I had been in the fashion area for about 5 years. Again, always on the PR side. Intrinsically, I knew there was more. What I did, my day in, day out, was very much focused on the clothes, which was super fun. I mean, it was like dressing up every day.
Yeah.
It was trafficking samples to and from magazines. It wasn't necessarily concepting stories. There was no writing. And interestingly enough, as I got into it, the creative piece of it was actually not really there. The creativity happened on the magazine side. I fulfilled, that my role was fulfillment. And as much as it was fun playing dress up with clothes, I knew if I was going to have a career as a publicist and as a marketing executive, I needed to find out what that more was. And again, it's funny, in your mid-20s still, I don't think I didn't even know what the more was. I just knew that I needed it.
Yeah.
And I knew that I wasn't going to find it in-house, particularly at a larger brand where the strategy came pushed down from the top. There wasn't a lot of room, at a Calvin or even at a Dolce, even though Dolce was smaller, there wasn't a lot of room and space for the mid-level manager type person to conceive of strategy or to concept ideas.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was all coming from Italy anyway. So
Very
at some
much
point,
so.
you're sort of seeing the limitations of your career in that role
Very
at
much
that
so.
time.
Very much so. And so I moved to Harrison and Schriftman into their fashion department, where I had a small coterie of clients. And to point, my job was to concept strategies, was to write press releases, to come up with ideas, because a lot of our clients at that point in time also had in-house PR agencies who dealt with the samples.
Yeah.
So this was really, how are we stepping out of the box? How are we collaborating and thinking creatively to get these brands from point A to point B?
Yeah. And I think at this time in New York, the PR agencies were their own thing. I mean, this was really the heyday of PR agencies in New York City. I mean, Elizabeth Harrison, Laura Schriftman, this was well known throughout any place you went in New York.
It was the Power Girls issue had just come out.
Exactly.
Cover of New York Magazine.
Exactly.
These ladies were PR princesses in New York City.
Yeah. And they're the people at the velvet rope making the decision about whether or not you come in. They're scripting which restaurant is going to be the hottest restaurant in the city. I mean, it really felt like if you knew the person who was running the PR team, you were in the gold. You were in the gold.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You were the next it girl.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be, or you certainly could be at the right party. That's for sure.
Yep.
So you were in PR for how long before you took a pause?
12 to 13 years-ish, the total duration before I took a pause.
Yeah.
At that point, I had gotten married, at Harrison and Schriftman, and was pregnant with my firstborn. And, frankly, was doing as many women do, the New York math, around keeping your career versus hiring childcare and, running the numbers. And they don't pencil out in this city.
Yeah.
To a certain place, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so I took a pause with the thought that I knew I would go back at some point. Not sure what I would go back and do, because my career at that point was somewhat incongruous with family life, at least young family life.
Yeah, being out all night is tough.
Out all night. I had 2 clients in Europe at that point, so I had a very set European schedule that had me every other month for a week in Milan. Which was great and fun, but again, tough to do with kids. And I had a husband who also traveled for his job that had an unpredictable travel schedule. So mine, although highly predictable, layer that with someone who has to leave within 24 hours notice.
Yeah.
And it just didn't pencil out. So I took a pause. I was out of the workforce for, let's think about this, about 8 years. Maybe 10, 8 to 10 years. So it was long. And it was, interestingly, a very formative 8 to 10 years in the world of PR and marketing.
In what way?
Social media.
Yeah.
I left a world that, mean, we had MySpace and, like the early days
about MySpace.
Yeah, we had the early days of Facebook when
Right.
it was still collegiate.
Collegiate, right.
Exactly. There were maybe early days of some social media. But again, to bookmark this, I mean, I didn't get an email address till I started at Calvin Klein.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't have a cell phone till I started at Calvin Klein.
Yeah.
So, we're talking the 10 years that I took a career pause were seismic
Yeah.
for our industry.
And completely shifted it because everybody becomes their own PR agent.
Exactly.
And that's the difference.
Print, it was in a lot of ways, when print media was kind of pushed off its throne.
Yeah.
I still personally strongly believe in print media.
Yeah.
And love to touch and feel. And again, that's the creative in me.
Yeah.
And also the romantic in me from those days. I mean, I still glorify magazines because that was where I got my start, was getting clothes in magazines. But a lot happened in those 10 years, such that when I started thinking about going back after I had my third child, I was faced with the cold news that I didn't think I had a job to go back to.
Yeah.
And that was my own opinion, but how could I re-enter a workforce that I left that had completely changed and had developed a new medium that I didn't even understand?
Yeah. So how did the colony come into play in all of this? Is this around the same time?
So this is about the same time. So I had my third child. She's now 9. We were living in my father-in-law's apartment while we renovated our New York City apartment. That's always a joy. And so we were kind of camping in my father-in-law's apartment, which was way too small. And I have this mental picture of, I used to always I sat on the floor in the living room because there wasn't enough seating for our entire family. And so my kids would end up on the sofa, like watching a show and having milk before bed. And I'm sitting on the floor, like answering emails. But it happened. So my father-in-law had owned the colony himself from 1969 through to the late 80s. Mm-hmm. It had been in the family. It passed out of ownership, but he kept his apartment there. So for us, the colony had been a continual storyline playing in the background during everything that you and I just discussed. The first time I met my father-in-law, my future father-in-law, the colony. My kids' first Christmas, the colony. Easter, spring break, the colony, the colony. He kept his apartment there, my father-in-law, so that was going home to visit Dad.
Yeah.
So fast forward to, like I said, we're sitting on the floor of my father-in-law's apartment in New York, renovating with a 1-year-old and 2 older children, and we get a call. And it's from Bob, my father-in-law. And he said, listen, I think we've got a chance to bring the colony back in the family. The family that had purchased it from him had decided that they were ready to sell. And in a gentlemanly fashion, they gave him a call and said, listen, do you want to take a look? And he'd always regretted selling it. He'd always regretted letting it go. And he really wanted it back. And for Andrew and I, it wasn't necessarily a conscious or active goal of ours. But again, like it was always a storyline playing in the background, I would be lying if I said that we didn't go to the colony for all of those years and sit by the pool and say, ugh, if only.
Yeah.
If only.
Oh, what could we do if?
Exactly. Yeah. Too bad, Bob, let it go because we could, whatever it is. So, there were all these pent-up hopes and dreams, but they were more in our heart than they were our head. Yeah. So we got that call. And of course, the initial thought is no way in hell. I had a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
Like,
and your third child is a 1-year-old at this point.
That's my third child was a 1-year-old. I had 2 other older children who were not that much older. To that point, they were 4 and 7?
Yeah.
And, no experience in hospitality. We note that as well. So there are lots of reasons not to do this.
But then why yes?
It started out as fulfilling my father-in-law's goal. It really was. It was to bring it back into the family for him, to do it as a gift for our family and to honor him in that way.
And was he going to still be involved at this point? This is actually, I've never asked you that question.
Yeah, no, you haven't. No, the intention was for him to not be involved, but he would live there. So imagine all the intricacies, because he'd always kept his penthouse apartment.
Oh my gosh.
So he lived there. And that's one of the reasons why the purchase and the acquisition, we were able to kind of make sense of it, was as much as he didn't own it, he lived there. So he knew a lot of the ins and outs, some from instinct, some from just being on the ground, and he would walk into the kitchen because he was a resident. So, no, he didn't own it, but no one's going to keep you out of the kitchen of a hotel that you live in.
Yeah.
So, he had a lot of intel on the ins and outs. And so we went through the due diligence process, and it was very quick. It was a 6 months due diligence, which was insane for anyone that's bought a business. And 6 months later, we owned a hotel, and it was largely on a wing and a prayer.
Oh my gosh.
Intuition.
And so what do you do in that first year? Are you starting to do things immediately? Are you sitting back and taking note? I mean, are you scratching your head and being like, what have we done?
Yeah, try to not burn it down. That's what we said. That's what we said.
And try not to cry every day.
Which, no, you definitely cry every day. Like, just carry tissues. They're still in my pocket or in my handbag over there. You're going to cry every day. That is what it is. Be okay with it. Just don't burn it down.
Yeah.
And that's what Andrew and I said to each other. We closed. It was December 28th, 2016. So any of you out there that know Florida know that is diving right into the height of your busy season.
Oh my gosh.
The season in Florida is opposite. It's Thanksgiving to Easter-ish, November to April. And there is no holiday busier than New Year's Eve in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
And so December 28th, we bought this hotel. We threw a cocktail party for all the guests that were in residence with us and in the bar that night. And we raised a glass of champagne and we looked at each other and said, okay, we can do this. Let's just not burn it down.
Oh my gosh.
So for us, to answer your question in all seriousness, no, we didn't strive to change things. I strived to learn. The goal was to really not change anything physically in that first season until we learned the business. And we learned what we had. We learned where the opportunity was. We had gut instinct about where there were some areas of opportunity. But until you really dive in and run a business, particularly a people business like hospitality, you don't know till you're in it. Numbers on paper can only show you so much. So the first tangible step that I took was to hire a consultant. And I actually did that previously. I hired Susan Ritchie was her name. I hired Susan, who's from Connecticut. I hired Susan during the due diligence process to walk us through diligence and to start teaching us, to help me interview for a GM. Obviously, we needed someone to live in Florida and run the business and to stay on the ground. Again, we're New Yorkers, and I was flying back and forth every other week. But again, don't forget, 1, 3, and 7 at that point. Like, I wasn't living in Florida. And so we hired Susan to really teach us the ropes.
When she was teaching you the ropes, was it sort of like the kind of thing that it's a slow burn where you're just learning and learning? Or were there just moments where you're like, I want to get out of this? Like, what have I done? I need to just go back to New York and be home and not deal with this hotel that I own in Florida. And what am I doing?
It was 100% a slow burn, but it was also this, anyone that's taught somebody a skill knows that teaching is not for the faint of heart. And sometimes you don't know what you're teaching someone until you're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what this was, is, she taught me again, how to read the financials and the basics of F&B and how an org chart and structure should look for an independent 93-room hotel, which is what we are. And there's these things, there's kind of a playbook. But then part of it is also just, okay, what hits you today?
Yeah.
What's going to come at us today? And then what does that mean?
It's true, because it's not just a business. I mean, you have people in and out
It's
every
organic.
day.
It's living and breathing.
It never stops.
A people business. I mean, we joke. I joke now. Here we are 7 years later. You never know what you're going to get. We have 275 employees, and we have 93 rooms worth of guests. You throw them in a pot, and you stir it up, and sometimes you make magic, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes it's really tricky.
Sometimes you don't.
Because it's a people business.
Yeah.
And so you're dealing with so many personalities.
Yeah.
And, there's very little that's static and guaranteed about what we create. And that's what makes it so difficult. So, back to Susan, what she was teaching us, and to your point, the days of like, you just want to cry, is, you go into a day and you think that it's going to be A, B, C, and D, whatever it is. You think you're going to do these things. And then something flies at you at 10 in the morning and you don't do any of those things because you're on the phone with Susan being like, but what does that mean? Yeah. Like, so this happened. So does that mean we have theft? Does that mean we have a problem with cash? Does that mean, it means we have to start an HR department because we didn't have an HR department and we've got these employee issues. And how do we solve employee issues without an HR structure? So we need to hire for an HR leader. Because, we bought a business that was fundamentally outdated.
Yeah.
And again, that's where the opportunity, and that was where, we talked about gut and we felt like we could make change. Our guts behind that change were because the business was outdated. We bought a business with 110 employees, but with no HR staff at all. So that meant no employee records. That meant a lot of loosey-goosey behavior and unstructured behavior. That also meant not a lot of staff training.
Yeah.
So like you may have a great experience with one person and an awful with another, or you may be told something with somebody and something else with another employee. So those early days were fascinating and, and full of knowledge. And I'm so grateful for Susan for what she taught me. And she taught me, of course, the industry, but she also taught me to be open. She taught me how to learn not only new skills, but a new industry midlife. And that's something that I never thought that I would have the opportunity to do. And she taught me to be a student, which is an interesting thing to learn, again, in your 40s.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And she also taught me to look for signs, because that's, again, when you run a people business, there's a lot of signs on the, signposts along the wall that will teach you about what's happening in the underside of your organization. And, I think as women, we talk about that as being gut or intuition again. And she taught me to trust my gut and to trust those signs, because generally when you see A and B and C, they do equal D.
So there was the people part of this, the HR staffing, this whole part of it. But there's also the physical structure of a hotel in Florida, which over the past, how long have you owned the hotel now?
7 years.
And over the past 7 years has completely transformed. And really, the identity of the Colony is in many ways visual. It's really very much social media driven. Because that's what's being pushed out. And so much of the hotel now is about the beautiful entry point, and it is about the beautiful things that are left on your pillow at night with your macaroons. Just not to ruin anyone's day.
Spoiler alert, but lingerie macaroons.
Lingerie macaroons. I know. I remember texting you and being like, "Oh, this is nice, great." But I think that that's such an incredible thing that you've also, in addition to taking this on midlife and learning this, you've also really mastered social media as it pertains to this brand. The Colony Palm Beach, I had stayed there before you guys took it over.
Yep.
And the Colony Palm Beach was a lot like a lot of the hotels in Palm Beach, which were vestiges of the past. There was leopard carpet everywhere. And it was sort of all this tongue-in-cheek of a bygone time.
Without a
and
doubt.
now it feels like there's an updated version of that, and it feels very much like it's its heyday again.
Yeah. And that came from a couple different avenues. One, it was necessity. We bought a building, 75 years old at that point in time, steps from the ocean, that had a lot of deferred maintenance. And some of that deferred maintenance was the physical plant, and some of it was exactly, as you said, kind of this tongue-in-cheek, nostalgic decor that seemed incongruous with the building itself. And so, I turned to my Calvin playbook. I turned to my Dolce & Gabbana playbook and was like, okay, well, how do we evolve a brand? How do we do this?
Yeah.
And yes, it's the service offering, the people piece of it that we talked about, but it's also the physical building. How do we storytell on a physical building? And that's where social media came into play. And again, something that had, largely evolved when I was out of the workforce, something else that I had to learn and figure out, because that gave me the platform for messaging that didn't exist 15 to 20 years ago.
Right.
The instant messaging of being able to push out to a large group of people your message about your brand. And so, I bought a hotel without a social media account. There was no footprint on Facebook, on Instagram, and I knew right away we needed to fix that. And, because so much can be done through pictures, we started right away. And we frankly started with watercolors and art, because I didn't necessarily have a building that I felt great about.
Yeah.
But I had a dream of what the building was going to become. And that's where, through social and through working with various artists, some of which we're friends with, Kate Shelter in particular.
Love Kate Shelter.
Work to create a narrative and a story and a vision that was enticing to people. And I knew in my heart of hearts we'd be able to fulfill on that.
Yeah. Well, when I was staying there last year, I think it was last year, I remember watching a girl walk in and change into the bathroom just so that she could take a picture at the Colony, and thinking to myself, wow, this is really an incredible thing to watch, because the hotel is as much a backdrop. Even the lobby of the hotel is as much a backdrop of people's dreams of what Palm Beach is as staying there and actually living that life and being there. It truly is a remarkable thing to see, and it's full 360, bearing it all moment, because it really is its own beautiful pink palace, as you call it.
It is, and that largely came, frankly, out of COVID.
Yeah.
The lobby transformation, which was something that was always on our radar. It was always on our agenda. But, we do run a business, and so it's tricky as you start to prioritize where you're going to put capital. the lobby is a non-revenue generating space in a hotel. It's necessary, but it doesn't, overtly generate revenue. So, my husband and I were negotiating as business partners and husband and wives tend to do about what we were going to do and where we were going to start. We had already started some updates by the pool. We had already renovated the ballroom because events are a big source of revenue for us. So we had started updating the physical plant, and we were trying to figure out what was next, and then COVID struck. And, we looked at each other and said, okay, we bought an operating business. We did not close. December 28th, we owned it. December 29th, we were open. So we'd never closed the business. And so here we were with a forced closure during COVID. Obviously, everyone was terrified. No one knew what was coming ahead of us. But we looked at each other and we said, we've got to take advantage of this. When, again, are we going to be given, honestly, the gift of closure? And so we negotiated with ourselves, trying to figure out, okay, what project can we consume? What project kind of can sit alone in its own little capsule and doesn't have tentacles out to other parts of the hotel? What can we do in kind of a 3 to 4 month period? Because we were trying to guess how long we'd be closed. We didn't know. And all roads led back to the lobby. And for us, it also made a heck of a lot of sense because the lobby is your first impression.
Yeah.
When you arrive, of course, there's that arrivals process of going through the porte cochere. There's seeing the pink building in front of you as you come up. But when you get out of your car, what you see is the lobby. And so for us, what better line in the sand to tell the world that we were reopening a different hotel than by updating the lobby?
Yeah.
Because you knew.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is in many ways the biggest line item on your marketing budget because, frankly, everybody else takes pictures of it, so you don't have to.
It's
That's
exactly
the greatest part about it. I mean, going back to what we talked about earlier, it's your PR agent, right?
It's funny because we've only shot the lobby once for that exact reason. After we did it, we had it professionally shot and never again. Other areas in the hotel we shoot every year to keep updated photography. We don't have to with the lobby.
Yeah, you just snap them off of
because
people's
it
Instagram.
just keeps on living. Exactly.
Keeps on giving. Well, I know that we're finished with time, really, but I want to ask you one more thing that I think about a lot, and we have a lot of conversations about this, and this is something that people ask me a lot about as a mom who works. Yeah. You have a crazy schedule, as do I, and sometimes I think I find people like me because you can have very frank conversations with people about being on a plane every couple of weeks and you running a hotel in Florida and being in New York and having 3 children. Give all of the working moms who are working outside of the home just a pep talk for 2 seconds about just keeping moving forward and what that means.
Of course. I mean, for me, it's exactly what you just said. Keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Don't stop. I've certainly don't know it all. I've learned a lot over the past 7 years. And for me, as someone who's high functioning competitive, like you are, like I'm sure a lot of you listening are high functioning and competitive, I don't like to miss things. I don't like to lose, and I don't like to fail. And I think the last 7 years have taught me that failure is okay and losing is okay. And some of my best lessons have come from failing and losing.
Yeah.
And meaning that I'm going to miss something, whether it be at work, sometimes I'm going to miss something, or with my kids, I'm going to miss something, or with my husband, I'm going to miss something. I missed his birthday recently. Yeah. But you know what? That's okay. And we need to forgive ourselves for that and realize that there's beauty in that relaxing into this is where I am right now. And this is a space and time, and it's going to change. My kids are going to change. My job is going to change. I'm going to change. My marriage is going to change. And the goal is to keep moving forward and to keep that change being positive and being okay that, you know what, when I miss something, I miss something. Yeah. And it's all good. Someone very wise once told me that life is a juggling act, and there's 2 types of balls, glass balls and plastic balls. And the key is knowing which balls are plastic. So they're the ones that you can let drop.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yep. Keep those glass balls juggling.
Keep the glass balls juggling.
The plastic
and let the
balls
plastic
are everywhere else.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere
Your life is littered with plastic balls.
Yeah, it's so true. You're like, and on that note.
On that
note. Sarah, thank you so much. It's been so great to have you on here. And I, again, usually ask people to think about something at the end of these episodes. And I think I will only say, just move forward. I love that advice. Just move forward. Take it day by day. We're all doing the best we can always.
Yep.
So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Where can we find you and follow along?
You can find me at Sarah J. Wetenhall on Instagram, or also at the Colony Palm Beach on Instagram.
That's where she is all winter.
That's where I am. Yay.
I hope to see you again this winter down at the Colony at the Pink Paradise when it's snowing in New York, because I too love the sun.
I know you do, and you love the heat.
I do love the heat so much. I might even see you there in August.
We
never mind.
Can't wait to have you back.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. Well, thank you for being here again.
A pleasure.
Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Rockefeller Center. Love Newsstand Studios always. I feel like this is a cozy home
this
being
is a
in
New
here.
York moment, Lydia.
I
this
know.
is great.
This is the greatest studio. And thank you to Joe for creating it. So I am Lydia Fenet. This is Claim Your Confidence. I hope you will tune in again next week. Have a great week.